Okay, so in part one, I gave some examples of waste and the way that those things are embedded in the way that we live our day-to-day lives. In the second part of the lecture, I want to talk about some of the economics around this stuff. Now, I'm a sociologist, I'm not an economist, and I don't have an expertise in economics per se, but you will find, I think, that these two disciplines often come into dispute with each other. Many sociologists treat the dominant form of economics as almost laughable in the way that it kind of treats the model of the human through the idea of the Homo economicus in particular that I've talked about earlier on, and particularly the way that it tends to remove emotions from human life and treats everyone as this kind of cold, calculating, kind of instant gratifying profit machine. Again, sociologists would, argue that economics dominates the way that we kind of live. It dominates public discourse. Economic measurements seem to be the key indicators of things like happiness and stuff like that. And many sociologists would fundamentally critique that point of view. What's interesting here is the way that the dominant economic thinking at a particular time has a real influence on the way that we think about notions of value and efficiency. Efficiency here is defined about how to make as much profit as quickly as possible, and value kind of ties into that definition, and value seems to be as much about getting as much as you can for as little money as possible. Again, a critique of the kind of neoliberal classical form of value is that that doesn't really do us much good. It doesn't really make us very happy. Really, it has implications in terms of anxiety and insecurity and all that kind of thing. Now, interestingly, much of the intellectual legitimacy of neoliberal economics is often traced back to Adam Smith and more recently people like Friedrich Hayek and others. But what's interesting when you look at Smith's work is that really there's aspects of his work about laissez-faire capitalism and free trade and stuff, they've only really picked and chose like specific parts of his work. They really ignore many other aspects, many more humanistic and philosophical points of view that come out of his work. So, like a lot of theorists and philosophers, when they're kind of brought in to used in economics or politics, they're often distorted. In similar ways, you can talk about how Marx was used in politics in various countries in the world, but it wasn't, very organic. It was often used by a small band of elites and things like that. So we can see the kind of aspects of this through the way that the Chicago School in particular dominates, and the particular economic people don't really have a great attitude towards sociologists. You can see, without mathematics, we'd be reduced to the cavilling of sociologists and the like. The idea here is, from the dominant neoliberal perspective, is that everything needs to be measured, that economics is a physical science based on maths and not really a social science. And there's quite often a really kind of problematic border between various fields where economists only talk to each other, sociologists only talk to each other, etc. So again, I've critiqued Homo economicus quite a lot, but this is the key model of a human that's used, this self-interested, everyman kind of understanding, which is a total misrepresentation of human nature, if there's such a thing, certainly a total misrepresentation of the way that humans live. So in terms of pointing out some of the absurdities that our dominant economic paradigm kind of promotes, particularly when it relates to waste, you can see this around measurements of GDP. GDP is essentially an analysis of transactions. So in a world where we can move around more and more, things like refrigeration make that easier. Technology kind of drives this stuff in many ways. We have many absurd situations. So this is a good example here. This is from early in the 2000s, where pretty much equal amounts of stuff was imported and exported out of America, and this could be probably this similar all around the world, I would imagine, in different ways depending on what their industries are. So in essence, that's a hell of a lot of waste. Think about all the air miles, all the petrol, all that kind of stuff that's damaging to the environment, just for stuff to move around when virtually exactly the same amount of tonnage was produced in the place that was exporting it out. So again, you can see that as kind of one form of absurdity, a complete waste of energy in terms of our relationship between production points and the consumption point. You can always also see this around fishing and our seafood industry. So, in fishing methods, often only 10% of a trawler's catch is useful. The other 90% is thrown back in the ocean dead. So again, real problem. 2 million tonnes of fish are taken from the oceans, which was, would be the equivalent of producing, 800,000 tonnes of farm salmon. Again, the methods here, the systems that are used to produce are inherently wasteful. So this waste is often in the current regime of economics just written off as externalities. None of this really appears on any balance sheets. So in economics, an externality is a cost or benefit arising from any activity which does not accrue to the person or organisation carrying on that activity. So there's positive externalities, and this can be like, having a nice view from a balcony, from a private building, the way bees fertilise fruit for free. Like these are positive externalities, things that can be good for us that no one pays for. In terms of the economics, negative externalities seem to damage people, the environment, and people's basically opportunities, their happiness, and no one pays for these social costs. In particular, when it comes to wastes and production, the environmental costs are just pretty much not paid for. So we can see here also a kind of fundamental questioning of what we mean by progress. Progress seems to be about creating more and more GDP, that I'll talk about in a minute. If GDP is going up, apparently in this system everyone's happy. But really progress doesn't really, that measurement of progress doesn't seem to correlate with people's happiness and people's security and people's well-being. So again, I'm not going to go through that slide in too much detail. You can read that kind of stuff. The GDP itself, gross domestic product, it's not a measurement of how people actually feel about what's happening in their life. It's just a measurement about the amount of transactions going on. Theoretically, like having lots of car crashes could make GDP go up. Assuming that people don't miss a lot of work or get too injured, it means that people had a car crash, those things have to get fixed. There's an insurance payout. There's lots of transactions going on there, so that could actually mean that that's good for GDP. Obviously, having lots of car crashes isn't a good thing. So there's other ways to think about this. There's people who've developed what's called the genuine progress indicator that actually brings in a lot of these externalities. Now, it's impossible to bring in them all, and I would actually argue against the very need to measure this stuff because it's not quantitative measurements don't necessarily ever correlate to the way people think and feel. But if we do have to have measurements, I do think the GPI is a better example. And you can see there the difference. The light green line there is the way that GDP has gone up over the past quite a few decades, where the genuine progress indicator is not going up as much, and in fact seems to have plateaued quite a bit over the past couple of decades. So again, if you're interested in economics, check out this stuff. Another way of thinking about the absurdities in terms of the waste and sustainability in the way that we live is the notion of ecological footprint. This is a measurement of about how much land is needed for a person to live. It's estimated about 1.9 hectares per person is available in the globe for that to happen. So, but the way that we live at the moment, we're taking up 2.3, which means that we need 1.5 Earths to live sustainably, which we obviously don't have. So again, there you can see the different rates. People in the West in particular have much higher footprints. They're consuming much more wastefully in particular. And so there's real problems here in the relationships between the very notion of development. It'll be difficult to imagine everyone in the world consuming like we do in the West. So it's not really up to the West there to, not really up to the rest there to catch up. Really what's going to happen, what needs to happen for notions of sustainability to improve is for the wealthy, Western cultures to actually start, reducing their consumption levels. Now, whether that's going to happen or not, that's, I suppose, the big question over the next couple of decades.